Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Brian Davidson. He is the Regional Sales Manager over at Traka Americas. And Traka is bringing us asset storage and lockers and all interesting things to keep all those things we're using that are important and tied to either specific electronics or maybe our vehicles, keys, things like that, in one central point that can be managed and has greater visibility to that. So we're going to dive into that because I think that this is a topic and something where there's a lot of issues that come up, but it's not necessarily like the biggest issue that gets talked about all the time. It's like these little headaches that come up, and I've dealt with them myself, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. But we're going to dive into that and figure out, how does Traka's solutions help you to deal with some of those pain points and challenges within your operation. So, Brian, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing well, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. Happy to have you on. Happy to talk about this. I've certainly dealt with some struggles around assets and things like that in the past. So I'm really interested to hear about your solutions and learn about them. But why don't you give us kind of just a brief overview from your perspective of Traka Americas and what it is that you guys do?
Sure. Yeah. So Traka Americas, we are part of the Assa Abloy Group, but we have a history that dates all the way back to the early 90s when a major airline reached out to us for a software program to help better manage their fleet vehicles. Well, through consulting with them, we realized the software wasn't going to be the total solution, that we needed a hardware element to help implement the processes that needed to be followed around issuing those keys. They loved it. It worked out really well. They established a business, Traka, to record a key asset in 95, and we've been growing ever since. We introduced our lockers in 2007 from an existing customer who was using our key management and said, hey, we have radios. We like the way you manage these keys. Can we extend this into radio management? And that birthed our locker management. And since then, we've done hundreds of different style assets for different reasons and different efficiencies for businesses. So looking forward to talking more about what Traka has done and how we've been able to add in those benefits to different customers around the world.
Yeah, definitely. It's very interesting how that kind of developed there. And I think it's something that certainly is a challenge in a lot of different industries, I can imagine. And we're interested in talking about the warehouse industry here. Obviously, it's a New Warehouse Podcast, right? I think the name says it all there. But let's just talk, I guess, for the listener, maybe that's not familiar with you guys, hasn't heard of these types of solutions before. I mean, tell us a little bit about when we look at a warehouse operation, like where would your solution kind of come into play? Where would it fit within the processes or within the facility itself?
Sure. So we initially had a lot of success in the warehouse industry, initially kind of managing the keys to forklifts and knowing who could drive what forklift. And that kind of allowed us to grow in that industry further. Then we started to see just regular fleet management. So manage of the vehicles outside of a warehouse or that are delivering to and from different locations. And the product kind of continuously evolved. And as devices became more and more prevalent, now device management, so manage those scanners. And these facilities are growing larger and larger, and being able to place these scanners and these keys where they need to be used within a facility has proven to be very valuable for a lot of different organizations.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I have certainly seen and dealt with situations where, you know, somebody takes that key from the forklift and then he can't find it, and you don't know how to move that forklift now. And you know, I have run into one situation actually where someone decided they put that forklift key in their pocket, they went home, and then the next day they were sick. And that did not work out too well, especially when you're trying to find those extras, and you know you don't necessarily think about it. So, I mean, tell us a little bit about, like, you know, from a perspective of what would be a traditional way of managing these things without, like, you know, some type of solution like you guys offer in place. I mean, what does like that, I mean, I said my experience a little bit, you know, it sounds like there was not much of a way of managing that in that case, but I mean, what do you see typically when you start to engage with customers that are dealing with some issues like that? I mean, how are they traditionally, or what's the traditional way that this was typically handled or would be handled?
Yeah, so usually whether it's a key or equipment, the issuing process is fairly similar. They've got usually a room or a central location, and it's kind of a free-for-all. People will go in, they'll grab their key or keys that they need for the vehicles, or they'll have piles of scanners on chargers. That's maybe in a manager's office to provide a little bit of better control. And then they go off, and whether they sign out or don't, or if they do sign out, whether they return that device is up to that manager checking at the end of the day. Well, as we all know, managers have better things to do than to be looking through an audit trail of who hasn't returned their device, what vehicles are in the lot, what vehicles are still out. And that's where our systems come into play, and being able to, again, put those keys where they need to be, where it's easily accessible. We don't want to make it difficult for the end user, because if it's difficult for the end user, they're going to find ways to circumvent it. So we'll normally put keys in your time clocks or scanners in your entry and exit ways, so that it's easy to collect that right as you come in to the warehouse. You grab your key, you grab your device, whatever it is you may need. And then that system is going to enforce the process that needs to be followed. So I can't come in and take multiple sets of keys. I can't take multiple sets of devices if my profile has limited me to having one scanner out of the system or one vehicle key at a time. Once I take that key, my access to the other keys is now revoked. Now, if I don't follow the process and pass it over to my friend and then they take it home, well, the next day when I come in, I'm going to try to access a key or access a scanner, and the system's not going to let me because my allowance has already been reached. So therefore, I'm then going to have to report my wrongdoings to the manager to be able to go through and correct it. And then that way you've got that instant accountability that users are going to follow that process, because I'm sure most people don't like talking to their managers on a daily basis because they haven't followed the processes.
Yeah.
Plus, we have things like curfews to help enforce these processes and make sure that items are being returned within a designated time frame. So that way a week doesn't go by and you do an audit trail and then see, okay, yeah, Brian still has 3 devices that he signed out on 3 different days. We could set up a curfew after 8 hours, 12 hours, whatever time frame you want to be notified that device hasn't been returned or that vehicle hasn't been returned back. So then you're limiting the amount of time that key or item can be out of the system unaccounted for.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. And I saw that curfew feature, and I think that's like really, really interesting, because it does, I think, add that additional layer of accountability a little bit, and allows you to check, like you mentioned earlier, you know, as a manager, a supervisor, whoever is tasked with, you know, keeping track of these assets. I mean, you don't want to spend, you know, all day checking, you know, make sure every asset is there, right? I mean, when we look at technology, we want technology to be able to help guide us and assist us and see where there's actually an issue, right? We don't want to be checking things that, no, there's no issue, right? It's kind of a waste of time, right? We could be doing something more meaningful. So tell us a little bit about how maybe some creative ways that, you know, that curfew feature has been utilized by some operations.
Yeah, so the idea, really, the biggest thing I think that with curfews is in our email notifications is we allow them to manage by exception. So if somebody hasn't returned their device, then that email alert is going to be sent out to the manager. even to the end user. Whoever needs to be notified that that device or that key hasn't been returned can be notified within a minute of that item going past its curfew. So that really helps ensure that these items are being returned within the designated time frame. We also have access schedules. So if you want a vehicle, make sure the vehicles aren't being driven outside of business hours. If somebody's coming in and taking the car home for the night or the weekend, we can set up an access schedule so that users maintain access to a certain point in day, let's say maybe 8 o'clock at night. And then from 8 until 6, those vehicles can't be pulled. Or maybe those items can't be pulled because the warehouse is shut down for that period of time. That way you can help ensure that people are only accessing items during the time frames that they should. And then if you set up our absolute curfew and it says it's due back by 9 o'clock, if it's not returned, you'll have that alert. And then once it is returned, they won't be able to remove it back out of the system.
Interesting. So it's a lot of different kind of checks and balances in place there. I mean, I think that's such a great thing because we had a serious issue one place that I worked where with scan guns in particular. People seem to, I guess, get an affinity or a love for a particular gun, and they would go to extreme lengths to try and ensure that they would only be able to use that scan gun, which is a little wild. Yeah.
One of my favorite stories was we found that somebody ended up putting their scanner in the bathroom tile. So when every morning they would just go and grab it from above the bathroom or from the bathroom tile. So once we implemented our locker, we found out quickly they weren't accessing the system, and we were able to say, like, where's this device? Where are you putting it? And they came clean.
Interesting. Yeah. I never thought to check that tile. I should have done that because I mean, we would go through times where, we would have it'd be the first shift, and the first shift was like our smallest shift. And so we by far had enough, scan guns to cover everybody on that shift. And they would come in and start and say that there were not enough guns. And I'm like, what is going on? And we'd be going through, we'd be cutting people's locks on their personal lockers and pulling them out of there and stuff like that. It was a big issue. And certainly something like these types of lockers that you guys offer would be able to help manage that and make that a better process. So, I mean, talk to us a little bit about, because I think, I think the obvious benefit to the solution is certainly like, that security, having that accountability. But tell us a little bit too about, from like an efficiency, productivity standpoint. I mean, how does this speed up that process of getting that equipment you need to really start the shift and get these people working where they need to be?
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
So our benefits really come more on the returning versus the starting of the shift, because it's hard to beat just picking up keys off a desk or grabbing a device off a scanner. That's going to be the quickest way, but you don't have accountability and you don't know who took what and when. So for us, we're really adding the efficiencies on the back end because we're having that centralized spot that is auditing those keys and items coming in and out. Then if there is an issue with the item too, when they return it, we have a feature called fault logging that will allow the user to record any kind of fault that may have happened. So maybe they've got a flat tire on a vehicle, or the scanner has a cracked screen, or it's not usable, or it's not connecting. The users can predefine a list of potential issues that the users can log on the return of the device. And then if it's designated as a critical fault, it'll prevent that device from being issued until that fault is repaired. It'll also send out an email alert saying, hey, Brian has logged this issue on this device. So we can get that whole process happening a lot quicker. on the repair, the inspection, and get that device back into rotation as soon as possible.
Interesting. I like that because I mean that's certainly an issue that we dealt with sometimes too, where there was a button that wasn't working properly on a gun or something, and no one would report it. They would just like stick that gun in the back of the cabinet, right? And then somebody, when we needed to actually like use all the guns and we got to that one, somebody would be like, oh, well, this one doesn't work, right? And then we basically lose that productivity because we didn't have the device. So, I mean, that's pretty interesting. And then so when that happens, I mean, are you able to then, if you could say it's the end of the shift, somebody reports the issue, but it's like, there's no shift after that or anything. It's not until the next day that you can do something about it. Are you able to like shut off that locker and not have people access that? Or how do you kind of manage that and be able to control that?
Yeah, so we have two types of faults. We have critical faults and non-critical faults. And the non-critical will just allow the user to log an issue. The critical fault will automatically lock that device down until somebody that has a fault override permissions comes in and inspects the device. And so regular users won't be able to access that until it's been inspected and that fault has been cleared, whether through device replacement or repair or just a general mistaking of selection of a critical fault.
Interesting. Yeah. I think that makes sense too. Cause I would worry that like, oh, somebody reports that there's an issue, but then it can still like get out into rotation. But it sounds like you guys have addressed that. So that's a good thing. And I saw something too about managing like the usage of a device. Is you're able to charge within the locker. Like if you have a scan gun, for example, you can have a charger in there, is my understanding. Is that correct?
Yep. So we support a variety of different style charging bases. And if it's all the same devices, we have a feature called first in, first out. And so if you're grabbing a single scanner, it doesn't really matter which scanner you're logging into. You just want one that's charged. So with our first in, first out feature, it'll allocate the device that's been in the system the longest. The only way that we indicated it's in the system is by placing it on the charger and having that being read through our RFID technology. So that way we can just come up, identify ourselves, pop open a door, grab the device, close the door, and go on our way. And now we've got a full audit trail of when the device was taken, who took it, and then how long it can be out of the system. And then when users come back, the door just pops open. We'll ask them if it has any faults. The door will pop open. If it's no faults, they'll return it. And it's a very straightforward process with a lot more accountability.
Interesting. So I mean, imagine in that sense too, like not only does it ensure that you're getting a device that's fully charged, right, but it's also ensuring that I guess like the usage for those devices is pretty evenly spread, I would imagine too, right? So I mean, right. You're kind of able to maybe get a better sense of like, okay, it's not like this, device is getting used, 50% more than the other one. So it's going to, go bad sooner. You're able to maybe like prolong the life of that stuff. I mean, do you see people utilizing it like that?
Yeah, it prevents cherry picking when you get those new devices and people are like, oh yeah, that's my device. Yeah. And everyone's going to grab that new device. It's just like you take whatever device it is that's issued to you. It also causes people to report issues because they're like, all right, I'm tired of getting this one device that's got this issue. I'm just going to go ahead and return that so we can get this fixed. And then usually it helps having that first in, first out because in the item allowance tied together, because then people aren't taking more than one device. It's only allowing me one device out of the system. So usually customers are able to reduce their total number of inventory somewhere in the realm of 10 to 20%.
Oh, wow. Interesting. That's a pretty big win there if you're able to do that. And I think that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to get your kind of head around that usage and be able to see that. But, obviously with something like this and being able to visualize and also, be able to manage that way. I mean, I certainly see how you can do that and be able to be okay because everything is kind of being managed through these processes now and being taken care of correctly. So, I mean, in that sense, right? I mean, I think a lot of the problems that the solution addresses are they're definitely there, right? They're definitely like prevalent through the industry, and, hard things to get control of without something like a system like this in place. But I think one thing is that they're hard to quantify in a way, right? It's hard to like quantify that, what is the productivity lost or the time taken away because, this gun was not reported broken or something like that. So, I mean, in that sense, right, if we have somebody that's listening, a warehouse manager or something, and, they're saying like, oh, I deal with that problem all the time. Like this is the solution for me or something like that. I mean, how would you go about trying to figure out some like ROI numbers around this, or what type of data collection are you trying to do to be able to justify the solution and be able to propose it to your upper management decision makers?
Sure. Yeah, that's something we come across often because some people will see our pricing and wonder how it justifies. And, when it comes to physical keys, we compare it to kind of access control, and we're about 1/10 of the cost it is to put on access control. Then when you come to the fleet side of things, I mean, you're managing usually a $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 asset with that. So usually the cost to invest in the management of that individual asset covers itself there. And then in devices, those are just ever increasing in cost, in the reliability of those devices to be able to complete one's work is becoming more and more prevalent. And so with those, what we've done is there's the cost of the asset itself. And so that's one cost. And then, there's a lot of it's administration time and how much time has been spent looking for that device. Because usually people aren't going to say, I can't find that device in 5 seconds, and that's all they're going to spend looking for it. Usually it's probably going to be a couple hours that they'll start to go really track that down. How many people are actually looking for that device? How many man hours are being used to look for that device? Then once it is deemed as lost, what are the administrative costs of then purchasing that device? Because now we've got to go through, do our checks and balances and have all those admin costs on the back end to actually purchase that. And then what's the productivity? That's probably the biggest asterisk. What's the productivity that device is providing to your daily operation? And now how many days is that device out of the system? Especially over COVID, we saw a lot of longer lead times on devices where, it's taking 6 months to get a device. And so you may be down that device for 6 months. And then if you add an hour of productivity that device provides you every day, well, what's 180 times $15? And then now all of a sudden that number starts to balloon where that initial asset, the true value of that asset going lost or missing or whatever, it turns into a 300-400% cost. So that's where we're able to usually show the value of our system, being able to reduce that potential from happening, have better accountability, and close the gap on being able to lose these devices. We won't be able to prevent devices from being lost, but we'll provide the best way to be able to limit those devices from being lost. And know who's lost them.
Yeah. I think that's a lot of great points there. I mean, it's such an interesting thing. Like, if you're, I guess on the outside looking in and you're like, you can't find a device, like, it's not a big deal. Right. But then, when you talk about it in those terms, like, well, how much time do you realistically spend doing it? And I know sometimes you're in a situation where, we did have a device that was missing, couldn't be found. And it got to a crunch time where, like, hey, we really need that device, right? Like, we really need somebody else to jump on picking and use this device. And then, you're not able to do that, then you lose that capacity as well, which can be very costly. So it's really, I think, important to understand all these little things that seem like maybe little problems throughout the operation, how they really over time add up and really build up. And I think it's great that you guys are addressing that with your solutions and being able to take a lot of these little headaches away from the operations managers, I'm sure, and also the users too, because the users get frustrated when they don't have the equipment available to do their job, or the equipment's not working properly to do their job. They're not happy about that either. So it's really interesting stuff here. So if we look to the future of kind of asset management and Traka, I mean, what is coming for the future? Any new technologies or anything that you guys are working on?
Yeah, so probably the biggest request that we've had is being able to manage multiple devices within a single compartment. So that's right now we only do a single device per compartment, but we are looking at being able to have that multiple device support. And then we're also looking at kind of standardizing our compartments. So right now we build each locker per device, and we've got a set range for a number of devices. But we want to go through, because we use our LF RFID, we need a close range to be able to read that device and ensure that it's been returned. But that requires a lot of work on our end. So we're looking to move over to ultra high frequency tags to be able to then standardize on a compartment that can manage basically anything that can fit into that compartment moving forward. So we're really looking forward to that upcoming technology. And I think that'll really help bring our costs down even further, making the solution that much more of a viable solution for the end users.
Very interesting. And it'd be interesting to definitely see those developments, and hopefully next year we'll be able to check that out and see those things coming to light. And I think it's really a great thing, these little pain points, as I mentioned before, that you guys are solving for, and being able to take those kind of headaches out of the way so that people can focus on the work and do what they show up to do. So very interesting stuff with you here, Brian, and really appreciate you coming on the show and talking to us about Traka. So if people are interested in learning more about Traka and are interested in looking at the solutions themselves, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, our website's going to be the best, www.traka.com. That's Traka.com. We've got a load of information on our warehousing and retail and distribution solutions, amongst others, that we've done. We've got all our contact info on there. And we'd certainly be happy to set up either in-person or online demonstration to show you what our solutions can do, understand your pain points, and see how we can work them in to hopefully solve those pain points.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well, so people can easily find it. So, Brian, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.